Hi, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 18th episode of the story about the time when Sasuke gives his sharingan eyes to Naruto on verge death in waves. Let's watch as Naruto Uzumaki, Uchiha takes world by storm. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The sun beat down upon a black-haired teen and the older brown-haired man he was traveling with. The boy was wearing blue cargo shorts and an orange t-shirt that had large red waves going across it. Black spikes of his hair came down to his blue eyes that eagerly surveyed the crowd and took in the palpable excitement. The man next to him was wearing black pants, a plain white t-shirt, and a red vest. His long brown hair swayed with each step while his black eyes watched the teen with a mixture of pride and amusement at the childish behavior. They were late to the start of the Chunin exam finals, but despite that the black-haired boy had a wide grin that stretched across his face as he scanned the mob around the stadium. Of course he was only a teenager and the loud cheer that erupted from the stadium easily changed his mood. He turned and scowled at the older man who was watching him with a bemused smile. "Why'd you have to get shit-faced last night? Now we'll probably miss the first round, ouch." The brown-haired man held a lecturing pose after smacking the back of the boy's head. The black-haired teen stared at him angrily while rubbing the sore area with his hands. "Don't give me that look, it was a love tap, stop being a prima donna. Besides, you shouldn't use such language around pretty ladies and children. Now relax, we're on vacation, forget about everything that's bothering you. I know hitting a roadblock is frustrating, but all it needs is time, so why don't you unwind now and try to enjoy yourself while we're here, kiddo? Kinda like you were 5 minutes ago. Teenagers, why can't they just skip that age completely and become adults?" The boy let it drop as they walked into the stadium, but it seemed they were only taking 10 steps every minute in the crowded hallways. The roars were nearly deafening as they echoed through the wide hall. It was almost impossible to make out the voice of the shinobi who was describing the fight to the audience. Eventually the crowd started to separate as they got farther into the stadium and it became easier to navigate. Eventually the duo arrived at their seats and the dark-haired teen eagerly sat into the chair, but when he looked up at the screen the announcer called the fight as the camera zoomed in on a scuffed-up teammate. The boy was surprised to see the lack of excitement on their faces after the win. Instead there was only a cold determination as they glared up at the contestants' booth. The Genin headed back towards the box as they announced an intermission, and the black-haired teen groaned in frustration before punching his godfather in the arm. The boy bit back a yelp after hitting the sturdy man who laughed heartily. "I've been hit by plenty of people stronger than you, Arashi, so you'll have to do better than that. Look on the bright side, there's still one more fight in the first round so we didn't miss much." The man stopped and looked around their section before waving at a food vendor. "Oi yakitori man, I need 4 over here." The man came over and delivered their kebabs after receiving the money. The long-haired man handed 2 to the boy before tearing into one of his. "That hits the spot. I didn't get to eat because you were in such a rush." He stopped to take a few more bites before continuing. "Well, we're here now so just relax and enjoy the moment because we'll be back to the grind soon." Arashi found it hard to ignore the man's advice because the crowd's energy proved to be infectious. The wide grin returned to his face as he happily munched on his yakitori and looked around. Their seats were okay because the screen was gigantic, but they could be better because the performers on the field were barely visible. Sharp blue eyes scanned the crowd and he was able to see some empty seats, but whenever the boy looked back they were filled once more. He saw that one remained open while he was eating his food and started to stand up. Arashi looked over to see the brown-haired man was looking at the generous cleavage that belonged to an attractive woman several rows down. Gigi, I'm going to find a better seat, I'll meet you at the hotel later." The man waved at the teen dismissively as he got up and agilely weaved through the crowd until arriving at the section with the empty seat. He was pleasantly surprised to see that it was still empty and next to an attractive blonde whose hair went her lower back. She was a mini skirt that came to the middle of her shapely thighs and a pink tank top with a sparkling emerald flower on the left side that stopped just above her navel while covering her modest assets. The girl's green eyes looked at him in confusion before he asked, "Hey, is this seat open? I'm here with my uncle but he's just up in the nosebleeds and probably has one because he's perving on the women up there." The blonde giggled and shook her head. "No, my friend was here too but she got sick and the stadium medical team took her home." The black-haired boy slid into the seat and smiled. "Thanks, I'm Arashi by the way." He extended his arm slightly and gently shook her hand as she answered, "Nice to meet you, I'm Amiko, and this is I." She leaned back to reveal a girl with black hair cropped at her neck. She wearing tan capris and a red belly shirt. Her back was turned to them because she was talking to 2 boys wearing fake Yugakure Hitai. Although the craftsman was skilled because they were convincing forgeries and it was unlikely the girl knew. I gave a quick nod while continuing her conversation, causing a sight to escape Emiko's full lips. I'm sorry about her, she's really into Shinobi and has always fantasized about helping one on a mission. I mean, it's pretty silly because a ninja wouldn't need a civilian's help, but it's still kind of romantic, I guess. The black-haired teen smiled at the girl and shrugged. You never know, it's probably easier to blend in with a pretty girl that would distract people. Emiko looked at him and smiled as a blush dusted across her cheeks, revealing the light freckles there. Maybe. After a few seconds later, Arashi checked the clock before looking back at Emiko. There's still some time left before intermission and I passed some food stands close to here. How about I get you something as thanks for letting me sit here? The girl pursed her lips momentarily before excitedly saying, chocolate mochi. The boy nodded before heading off. Alright, I'll be back soon. As he stood up to leave, the screen lit up and the faces of the contestants flashed across with information for the gamblers, and he quickly turned away after staring intensely at Haruno Sakura's page when it popped up. Emiko looked away from Arashi as he rapidly disappeared and up at the screen before her eyes popped open. Wow, that girl is lucky. I can't believe that she used to be teammates with the Uzumaki Naruto. The teen sighed wistfully as I leaned back with a grunt and interrupted her train of thought. Damn it, those guys were total posers. I was actually hoping to meet some shinobi here too. The blonde shrugged. Well, it's only the first round, there's still plenty of time. The girl let out an aggravated groan as she slumped in her seat. Maybe, but this is my best chance to meet one. These tickets were super hard to find and expensive, so getting them next time isn't guaranteed, and that's only if this place makes enough money for it to be profitable enough to do again. Don't be such a downer, I'm sure you'll meet one. The black-haired girl ignored Emiko as her purple eyes scanned around the stadium. There's definitely no shinobi in this area, I can tell. The green-eyed girl shook her head in exasperation. And how can you tell? I have a sense for these things. If a shinobi is around, I'll definitely know. Anyways, I need to move around and increase my odds. I stood up and squeezed past her friend, who mumbled inaudibly, but you've never met a ninja before. The black-haired girl nearly ran into Arashi as he returned with the food, but she didn't spare him a glance before hurrying out of the stands. The boy shrugged and sat down before handing a bowl of mochi to Emiko, who looked at him with surprise on her pretty features. That was fast. He shrugged in response. I got lucky, there weren't many people in line at the stand. She smiled gratefully before eating a spoonful. Delicious, thank you. No problem. The black-haired teen looked over his shoulder. So where was your friend off to in such a hurry? Emiko grinned before she swallowed some of the treat. Well, her senses were saying that no shinobi were around, so she went to look for some. The boy let out a hearty laugh after hearing that. At least she's got plenty of determination. Arashi was about to continue, but the speakers began crackling as the screen flashed to the stadium in the Leaf Village. The intermission is over and the last fight of the first round shall begin. Will Team 7 of Konohagakure and Team Dosu from Otogakure please report to the arena floor? The stadium roared as the doors opened and the black-haired teen's head snapped up to the screen. Emiko looked over at the boy before nudging him quickly. What else were you going to say? The boy's crystal blue eyes seemed dull for a moment before returning to their normal vibrancy. Oh, well, I forgot. He laughed flatly as the blonde giggled. You're pretty excited. Is this gonna be your first shinobi battle? Arashi tilted his head in an amused manner. Yeah, my stupid uncle made us late, so I missed the ones before. I guess you'll have to help me out because it's apparent you're an expert. Emiko put her arms around his and pulled the boy closer. The key is to watch really close because sometimes they move too fast to see, but when that happens there is a shinobi in this stadium that delivers a play-by-play. Still, the parts that we've seen are pretty cool. The dark-haired teen maneuvered his arm around Emiko's back and she rested on his side as they looked up at the screen while the teams were announced. These three proud Genin represent the newly formed Otogakure. The proctor stopped as the stadium in Konoha erupted into boos. Once it quieted down, he introduced them, Kinuta Dosu, Abumizaku, and Karen. The foreign nin were once more showered with boos from the crowd, but they seemed to revel in it until the audience quieted down, and now presenting three Genin of mixed villages, one from Sunagakure and two from Konohagakure. This time cheers overpowered those who were booing. Damari of Sunagakure, Sai of Konoha, and Haruno Sakura of Konoha. When the pink-haired girl was announced, the black-haired boy began flexing his arms tensely. Are you okay, Arashi-kun? You seem upset. He faced the girl and grinned. It's fine, I'm just really excited to see the fight, and sort of mad because I could have seen three already. Emiko's question was cut off as something flashed in front of the two of them and pierced the concrete at their feet like it was paper. The girl let out a scream, but the cheer from the crowd around them drowned it out as the fight started on the screen. Arashi put his fingers on her lip and pulled her with him into the concession area. Most people were pushing to get back into the stands, but the boy was able to effortlessly maneuver through all of them without losing the girl's hand. Eventually they reached an abandoned stairwell and the blonde tried to organize the millions of questions swirling in her head. However, the only thing that came out was, "What?" The boy leaned closer. "The thing is, I'm a shinobi." The dumbfounded girl could only repeat herself, "What? The guy I'm with isn't really my uncle. We were on a mission to retrieve something and now some missing nin are chasing us for it." The plan was to put on disguises and lose them in the crowd, but apparently that didn't work. Emiko took another moment to gather herself before speaking, "So this isn't even what you look like?" She trailed off before continuing angrily, "Basically you've been lying to me this whole time. How do I know you are who you say you are? Maybe you're trying to kidnap me." The dark-haired boy didn't answer verbally, instead he lifted his hand up to his left eye and touched it with his finger. When he pulled it away there was a colored contact lens on the end and Emiko gasped at what was behind it. As she did, the man peering from behind the doorway pulled back and slunk back into the crowd. He waited for the two to re-emerge and carefully followed them back to the exit, making sure to never get too close. The cloaked man never confirmed the boy's identity, but if a civilian recognized a shinobi they had to be famous, and his age only narrowed the possibilities, yet her knowing based on an eye made his identity almost indisputable. The ninja smiled, happy he was lucky enough to see a bunshine attack the teenager. This opportunity could prove profitable to the organization and allow him to advance in rank too. He summoned the basic messenger rat after getting outside of the stadium and had it scurry to his teammates to tell them which gate he went out of. There was a tracker in every unit that had a summon which would be able to pick up his scent and follow. Naruto rubbed his dyed hair and tried to suppress the guilt bubbling in his stomach for deceiving the civilian by having a shadow clone throw his old kebab skewer at him to fake an attack. After Emiko found out who he was, she got pretty excited and tried her best to help him escape, so that helped ease it somewhat. But it still felt weird for tricking the girl like this. The whole plan was really spur of the moment. The Konohanin really wanted to watch the matches and see all his friends in action, but after Sakura's face flashed onto the screen the only thing he wanted was to be anywhere else. The Jinchuriki felt terrible about their argument and the cowardly way he left. He really should have trusted his teammate, but instead old insecurities get the best of him and the Chunin pushed her away. Emiko pulled on his arm to turn at the next street and he pushed thoughts of the pink head out of his head. He was already lying to the blonde girl and didn't want to do her any more disservice by thinking of another woman. The Chunin adjusted the hat he bought and leaned closer to her as they walked down the street arm in arm. "We should probably move to the outskirts and lay low for a little, wait for the danger to pass." Emiko placed her head on his shoulder and whispered back, "Okay, there's a forest nearby that we can take some back alleys to get to quickly." Naruto nodded and allowed her to lead him through the streets until they arrived at the forest. After walking in a little bit the boy scooped her up bridal style and started leaping through the trees, causing the girl to grip him tightly. Eventually they came to a small clearing near the center of the woods and he stopped in the center of it. The Chunin gently placed the civilian down before looking around the forest. The blonde patted the ground next to her and he took the seat. "Sorry for getting you involved, I didn't mean to put you in any danger." Emiko shook her head rapidly, "Don't worry about it. I'm safe now and it was pretty exciting. Today has been the craziest day of my life, and it would have been harder for you to get through the city easily without knowing the layout." Naruto flashed Emiko a dazzling smile and grabbed her hands. "See, I told you a civilian could help a shinobi." The girl blushed as she leaned closer to the boy and Naruto quickly closed the distance. Their lips met and the Chunin was surprised when it was her tongue that asked his lips to open, but he quickly complied before pushing the invading muscle back. Emiko pulled away slowly and bit his bottom lip gently. When she let go the shinobi lifted the blonde girl up and had her pinned against a tree before she knew what happened. Her dark green eyes were clouded with lust, desire, and some fear as she looked up at his bright cerulean orbs that stared hungrily at her, but Naruto placed a soft kiss on her lips before trailing his lips down her neck until he got to the top of her cleavage. Then the black-haired teen brought his lips back up the other side of her neck before kissing her again. Emiko relaxed against the tree and let his tongue explore her mouth. She was pleasantly surprised by his gentle nature. The shinobi was treating her like she was glass, however, it also made her somewhat mad. The girl wanted to show him that she didn't need to be handled like a porcelain figure. She pushed off the tree and tackled the boy to the ground before straddling his waist. Emiko pulled off her pink top and threw it aside as she smiled down at him tauntingly. "I thought shinobi were supposed to be tough." The fox-like grin that answered her made the green-eyed teenager uneasy, and she let out a meep when the boy disappeared in a puff of smoke moments later. Suddenly Emiko was alone in the clearing and she looked around frantically for a moment, until the ground beneath her started to shake and the blonde smoothly emerged from the dirt and scooped her up before turning the tables. Now she was pinned and he formed a cross with his fingers while straddling her. Suddenly 24 disguised Narutos were around her, but they all quickly vanished into the woods. She looked up at him in confusion and he answered the silent question, "I don't want anybody but me to see you," before leaning down to kiss her. Naruto and Namiko were naked as they cuddled in the clearing. They had been there for quite a while and the tournament was probably nearing completion, however, they were comfortable and in no rush to go anywhere. Things changed quickly though because the shinobi untangled himself from the girl's embrace while sitting up. "Shit. My clones saw some people approaching and they don't look friendly." The shinobi pulled his boxers and shorts on before helping Namiko pull up her panties, then he threw his shirt on over her head before moving to the west end of the clearing and looking across to the east. 4 men emerged from the tree line and faced the half-dressed couple with confident and slightly lecherous grins on their faces. All 4 of them wore red shinobi sandals, black pants, red vests with gold and white kanji that meant guardian and fire, and a Hittite with the kanji for High no Kuni on it. The one on the far left was probably 5'8" and a little stocky. He had purplish gray hair that stuck straight up, about 13 inches, with the assistance of his headband and reddish-brown eyes. The one next to him was easily the tallest and thinnest. He stood about 6'1", had sky-blue eyes, and brown hair that was shaved close to his head. The one on the far right was built like a Suma, except with straight green hair down to the nape of his neck and purple eyes, while the one on his left was only Naruto's height with black eyes and orange hair that extended down his back in a thick, spiky ponytail. The man on the left grinned predatorily at the two. "To think we'd find Namikaze Naruto out here." The skinny one next to him continued derisively, "And to think he'd reveal his sharingan for a little pussy." The man that was as tall as Naruto seemed somewhat apologetic. "Well, it's to be expected, he is a teenager after all." The muscular shinobi on the right seemed excited as he said, "It doesn't matter how we found him, all that matters is we did. It's a great victory for the mighty High no Kuni shinobi." Naruto looked confused as he tilted his head to the side while staring at the strange group. "Right, so who are you guys?" The stocky one snorted angrily, "How can this little punk not know about our great organization?" The lanky man next to him spat on the ground before speaking condescendingly, "He's just a dumb brat, who'd expect an ignorant punk to know anyways?" The shortest ninja in the group took a deep breath before continuing in a calm manner, "It's not like we're a major village, most people probably don't know about us. Enough, we'll just tell the Gaki so he knows exactly who it is that's going to defeat him." When the burly green-haired one finished, Naruto's sweat dropped. Were they really just going to tell them who they were and their goals? Well, far be it from him to stop them. Once again the stocky one with the strange purple-gray hair started, "We represent a powerful order dedicated to improving the great nation of High no Kuni." The lanky one with the shaved head continued, "Too long has the corrupt, pathetic, and weak village of Konohagakure operated in the shadows, all the while its clandestine actions harm the innocent citizens." As usual, the shortest one went next, "We know Konoha means well, but it cannot go unpunished for past crimes despite good intentions." The green-haired one finished, "The High no Kuni shinobi will destroy the Leaf Village and create a shinobi army loyal only to the daimyo. We are Squad 142. All of them chimed in individually to say their names, going in the same order they always do. Ren, Ken, Shen, and Harunobo. The blonde just stared blankly at them. "You guys are fucking idiots. How do Konoha's actions hurt Fire Country?" Ren became angry after hearing the chunin. "Shut up, boy, don't speak to your betters like that." Ken continued in a scathing tone, "It's no surprise, little shits don't have manners." Shen seemed apologetic, "I wouldn't expect him to understand, guys, he was raised in the village." Harunobo cut the small man off animatedly, "Don't make excuses, we'll have to educate him. Konoha is a stain on the nation. Huddle up, guys." The 4 got in a tight circle and began whispering furiously before Shen answered, "Well, it's corrupt." Ken pushed the orange-haired ninja out of the way, "Yeah, it's not like they tell everyone their dirty laundry." The disguised teen massaged his temples, "And how do you know it's corrupt?" They whispered amongst themselves quickly before saying in unison, "Because they're shinobi." Naruto continued in a patronizing tone, "Okay, so how would High no Kuni shinobi be any different?" The strange foursome was once again without an answer, so they tried brainstorming together. After half a minute they turned towards the blonde and yelled together, "The honor and purity of Daimyo-sama." The chunin dragged his hand down his face, "You guys never thought that Konoha isn't directly under his authority because he needs it to be separate. If the Leaf Village was directly under his control, then missions would be authorized by him. If a team was caught doing something illegal in another, then he would be directly responsible, and it's very possible that all of the country would go to war, not just Konoha. Team 142 just shook their heads dumbly, as if they couldn't believe it, but he continued anyways. The biggest percentage of Konoha's budget comes directly from the daimyo, so he has plenty of influence over the village without being in charge, and he doesn't have to deal with any of the ramifications because he isn't directly tied to it. The four appeared to get angry when he finished, and Ren yelled, "It's foolish that Hai-sama has to pay petty mercenaries for the glorious duty of protecting this country." Ken continued where the stocky man left off. "Yeah, your rotten village must force him to do it, and then you filthy ninja would switch sides if somebody else paid you more." Red hair quivered as Shen shook with rage. We won't let your village bleed our country dry. The time for action is now," roared Harunobo. Naruto scoffed at the men. "You four are morons. Even if all ninja were self-serving, it wouldn't be in their best interests to switch sides for one big payday. If they did, then potential employers wouldn't hire them because they would have to constantly watch out for betrayal. Eventually the money would run out and there'd be no safe haven when enemies attack. You're all just pawns working for someone that craves power." All four of them shook with rage for several seconds before screaming in unison, "Don't insult Furita-sama like that." Then they launched a barrage of kunai and shuriken. Naruto easily avoided their attack and snatched a stray knife from the air, but Emiko was left defenseless. The projectiles pierced the civilian and the men looked joyous that the Chunin didn't try to save her, but before they could comment, the girl transformed into a copy of the boy and disappeared in a puff of smoke as the weapons fell harmlessly to the dirt. Naruto was grinning from his spot in the clearing as the men split up and surrounded him on four sides, forming a cross. The Chunin laughed inwardly at their amateur mistake and waited for their next attack. Each man launched another wave of projectiles towards the teen and he jumped high into the air. The Jinchuriki was vulnerable while his feet were off the ground, yet none of his opponents could capitalize. They were too busy dodging their allies' blades because they stood directly across from one another instead of staggering themselves. Realizing he was dealing with amateurs, the teen launched towards Harunobo after his bare feet hit the ground. The man tried to get in a defensive stance and slash Naruto with a kunai, but the Chunin's wind-enhanced one easily sliced through it and he allowed the momentum from the strike to twist his body until his elbow crunched into the brawny man's nose, causing him to let out a gasp of pain as the cartilage shattered. Then he fell to the ground while clutching his bleeding face. The disguised teenager launched his glowing kunai through the downed ninja's chest and deep into the ground before turning to see the other three men had regrouped after their initial debacle. The three Hi-no-Kuni shinobi weren't focused on him though, instead they were staring at the corpse in shock, like it was the first time they'd seen a dead body. Just like I expected, these guys aren't even that experienced. They look like me, after I saw Sasuke. The memory of his fallen comrade fed the anger that was already present from them barging in on him and Emiko. Streaks of red bled into his right eye as he launched towards the stunned trio faster than before. Shen hit a tree at the edge of a clearing with a sickening crack after getting shoulder-checked by the teenager who turned to face Ren when the attack connected while saying "Futon, Goku." An orb of wind the size of a beach ball raced towards the man and impacted his stomach before bursting apart into tiny blades that left deep gashes on the front of his torso that gushed blood as he fell to the dirt. Ken stared at the disguised teenager while his long legs shook uncontrollably. Naruto started walking closer and the man lifted his arms in a pitiful defense as the boy cocked his fist back. The strike was able to easily bypass the guard and left the lanky ninja unconscious. The Chunin quickly realized Ren wouldn't survive the wounds from the futon jutsu after seeing the pool of blood around his body, and walked over to check on Shen while cursing silently. He wanted to keep the other three alive after killing Harunobo, who had the strongest chakra, but his anger got the best of him. A quick inspection of the diminutive man revealed a broken spine. He didn't have very much time left even if a medic like Tsunade was there. He walked back to Ken with a sigh. "Well, you'll have to do. I'm not the best interrogator, but there's plenty of good ones in Konoha." He bit his thumb and prepared to summon a transport toad when a loud crunch echoed through the clearing. Naruto let out a shit, as he looked up to see the man wasn't really unconscious and had taken a suicide pill. Ken's left eye was swelling shut and his purplish-gray hair was spread haphazardly on the ground around while he struggled to keep his head up, but raw hatred was shining in his light blue eyes while he stared at the Chunin. "I'll never do anything to help your shithole of a village." Naruto was caught off guard by the venom lacing his statement. "Why did you do that? The guy you serve is just using you to gain power, he's taking advantage of your ideals." The dying man let out a mocking laugh, but it sounded more like a gasp. "You think I'm wrong because you believe Konoha is a good place, yet it's so easy to believe that when you live inside the walls. That village reaps hatred and the innocent people of this country are the ones who suffer for it. You disgust me." Ken tried to spit at the teenager, but the powerful poison had done its work quickly, and the shinobi's head fell back as he died. Naruto slumped to the ground in defeat, his anger disappearing while the confusion and guilt set in. Nearly 10 minutes passed before he mustered up the will to move, and after making some cage bunshine to dispose of the bodies and clean up, he slowly walked to the area his clones took Emiko. As the boy approached them, he plastered on a smile on his face, and when the blonde girl saw him, she ran forward and embraced him in a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're all right. They didn't hurt you?" The disguised ninja gave her a reassuring grin. "Of course not, you've seen the movie. How could you think a couple of chumps would be enough to take me down?" Emiko placed her head on his chest and mumbled out, "I didn't, but you said you were running from them." Naruto rubbed the distraught girl's back comfortingly. "Well, shinobi are supposed to avoid confrontation if possible, but in this case it wasn't. Those guys won't be able to hurt anyone ever again though." He waited until the civilian relaxed in his arms before continuing, "We should get back. I'm sure your friend is wondering where you are right now." The blonde didn't answer immediately, but after a few moments she asked, "Can I get a picture with you first? I mean the way you really look." The disguised shinobi placed his chin on top of her head. "Of course, I'll sign it for you too." Emiko pulled back and looked around the area. "Damn it, where's my purse?" "Back in the clearing with your other stuff. I left a clone to pick it up and bring it here." Shortly after Naruto finished the bunshine, entered the clearing and presented the girl with her things before dispersing. "See, now do you want to take the picture like that or get changed first?" The girl blushed after realizing she was in nothing but a pair of panties and his shirt while he only had cargo shorts on. A couple minutes later they were both presentable and a clone was holding the camera, but Emiko was looking at him expectantly. "Aren't you going to change back to your real appearance?" Naruto rubbed the back of his head embarrassedly after forgetting he had too. The shinobi actually dyed his hair and put on makeup to cover his scars. Figuring she wouldn't care if he just did a quick transformation, the Chunin made the ram sign before being covered in smoke. When it cleared, he was standing in the same clothes except his whisker marks were there along with spiky blonde hair. A bright smile formed on Emiko's face as she hurried over and wrapped her arms around his midsection. Naruto put his arm over her small shoulders and they smiled as the cage bunshine held up the camera. "Cheese." After snapping a picture, the clone pulled out the photograph and handed both of them to Emiko. She pulled out a Sharpie and gave it to the disguised nin, who quickly wrote a small note and signed it. Handing it back, they made their way back into the city silently. It didn't take long, and once they got near the stadium the two decided to part ways. "It was great meeting you, Emiko. Sorry about dragging you into this whole mess." The girl gave him one more hug while saying, "Don't be, this is a story I can tell my kids and grandkids, although I'll be sure to edit it slightly." The blonde looked up at the disguised boy and he leaned to quickly give her a soft kiss. She looked surprised momentarily but grinned shortly after. "Goodbye, Naruto." The blonde looked at him expectantly and he leaned down to give her one more kiss, and she prolonged this one. Several moments later they pulled their heads back and he placed his forehead on hers. "Goodbye, Emiko." He disappeared in a swirl of leaves moments later and the girl looked around confused as the mini whirlwind sent her hair everywhere. After regaining her bearings, she decided to head over to the area she and I agreed to meet at if they got separated. Several minutes later the green-eyed civilian arrived and was surprised to see her dark-haired friend there. The raven-haired girl was sitting grumpily with her arms crossed under her C-cup rests. She looked up and smiled briefly after catching a glimpse of her blonde friend, but it quickly morphed to a frown. "Where were you?" "I was starting to get angry. And a little worried." Emiko smiled at her friend. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." I stared questioningly at the glowing girl. "What? Tell me." "I already said you wouldn't believe me, so I'll show you." "Here." Emiko handed the brunette her picture and watched as her purple eyes widened. "No way." The blonde grabbed it out of the girl's hands and flipped it over so she could read the message. "Emiko, thanks for the seat at the stadium and all your help with the mission. I'm glad we met, and I want you to know today will be one I always remember. Naruto." She carefully placed the picture into her purse once more as I stared at her jealously. "No way, Emiko, I can't believe you got to meet the Naruto." The blonde nodded cheerfully. "Yup, the same one that's all over your bedroom wall." The dark-haired girl ignored her while leaning in conspiratorially and whispering, "Did you guys do it? Do you think I could borrow some of those posters? I'd really like them to help me remember today. I've always been partial to the shirtless one," was Emiko's only response. Naruto opened the door to the room he was sharing with Jiraiya to hear the man's lecherous voice. "So, did you have fun with that pretty little blonde?" The boy walked in the room and didn't look around, he just nodded slowly and fell back on the futon that was left out this morning. The Senin sighed after seeing his godson's despondent mood. "What happened? Did you get shot down?" The disguised boy lifted his head and was surprised to see the man had already removed the die. "No, but I was ambushed by some shinobi that followed me from the exams." Jiraiya put down his notebook and faced his apprentice. "You only have yourself to blame. That tactic was so obvious that even the worst ninja in the stadium saw it. I'm not surprised one decided to follow you." Naruto sat up before saying, "Well, I found out something because of it. Apparently these guys were part of a group called the Hai no Kuni Shinobi, and answered to some guy called Furito. They were Team 142, so it's not be a small organization." The spy master raised his hand to interrupt. "That doesn't mean there's 141 other teams, Naruto. You can assume things even if they seem obvious, and those guys may not even know how many teams there were. Now continue." The boy nodded. "Anyways, they said their goal was to destroy Konoha and create a shinobi army that was loyal only to the daimyo." Jiraiya nodded and pulled out a weathered leather notepad. "I knew that name sounded familiar, and the plan confirmed it. The Hai no Kuni Shinobi is a defunct group that ended a long time ago, probably a couple years before you were born. They also had the same goal, so it's possible a few old members had a reunion somewhere and decided to start it back up. This might explain the drop-off in requested missions from some districts in the country. That's something I'll need to investigate further. Did you send any back to Konoha in the totes?" Naruto shook his head. "I killed one and tried to capture 3, but I accidentally broke one's spine. My Guko was too strong, and the other one surprised me by using a suicide pill when I thought he was knocked out." Jiraiya got up and patted the boy on his back before putting his red vest on. "Alright, well, I hope you learned something from that. Try to capture all your opponents if possible, and always confirm the captives are knocked out before checking potential casualties. Anyways, now that you're back, I'm going to get incredibly drunk and find some pretty ladies." "Hookers," interjected Naruto. "Hookers are women too, boy. Now pack up because we leave bright and early tomorrow." With that he exited and slammed the door while the Chunin fell back on his futon, wondering who else gained his rank today. The crowd stared at their pamphlets in wonder as complex seals on the inside turned into a bracket and basic information on the fighters, while a board appeared next to the proctor in a puff of smoke. Most of the Konoha Junin left quickly and headed towards the competitors' entrance to the battlefield after a quick glance, and after the other teams got a closer look at the fights they followed. Genma dispelled the board and stared at the 6 combatants in front of him before his hand rose towards the sky, causing the crowd to roar thunderously. However, his microphone-enhanced voice could still be heard over the deafening cheers. The first matches between Team Gai Kanahagakur and Team Sakana Votogakur, the Jounin allowed the energy to reach a fever pitch before slicing his hand through the air. "Begin." Lee appeared to be a blur of green as he sped towards Jirobo. The spandex-clad shinobi jumped and attempted to deliver a brutal kick to the left side of his opponent's face, but the bulky teenager managed to lift his arm to block the strike, yet the force behind it sent him skidding back a dozen feet. Kitamaru and Sakon rushed towards the taijutsu specialist's exposed back, but were forced to stop and flip away when several kunai with sizzling tags wrapped around the handle landed in front of them. The explosion sent dust everywhere and blocked the two sound nin's view of their teammate, but they had other things to worry about as more kunai herded them away from the fight. Neji directed his teammates' throws as the two fled into the grass and she forced them to the sandy dunes on the stadium's south end. The Auto Shinobi regrouped as the Hyuga and weapons mistress rushed into the grass while Jirobo fought Lee in the center of the arena. The older teenagers eyed the thick grass warily before 3 blasts of compressed air burst out with the Konoha following the attack. They jumped opposite ways and Neji forced Kitamaru to move further away with more haki kushu while Tenten kept Sakon dodging the fine edges of her kunai. The effeminate shinobi frantically avoided the countless projectiles pursuing him from every direction. There seemed to be no end to the metallic rain trying to slice through him, so he was confused when it stopped and the kunoichi flipped through the ox, horse, and dragon seals before holding the last, Raiten, Kaminari Shibari. Lightning release, thunder binding. The kanji for barrier glowed blue on the handles of 3 kunai that were in the shape of an equilateral triangle with the green-haired ninja in the center before lightning arced between the weapons and formed a blue pyramid that trapped him. Tenten lips split into a satisfied grin as she dropped the hand seal after the barrier became self-sustaining. Everything was going according to plan. Flashback: in a private training ground near the village wall, the Junin from Kanahagakur and Sunagakur participating in the final sat with the Hokage. Sarutobi looked over the young shinobi in front of him with an appraising eye before starting. "I'm sure you're wondering why I've gathered you here today?" The elderly leader lit a pipe before inhaling deeply. Awkwardness permeated the clearing as potential opponents glanced at each other quickly. The Hokage just exhaled and waited while the Junin stared respectfully at him, wondering when he was going to continue. These children will be Chunin in a month's time, and leading squads before the year is over. Respecting your leader is necessary, but reverence is foolish and clouds judgment. They need to think proactively and not be afraid to voice their opinions, even to the Hokage. Nobody will be there to babysit them anymore, now they must rely on themselves. Donning the flak jacket symbolizes the safety net being cut away, and it is best they learn this lesson early. Sarutobi was pulled from his thoughts when Shikamaru spoke up. Since all of us will be fighting in the finals, I'm guessing it has to do with that, and I know it's going to be troublesome. A smile crossed the cage's face at the Nara's response. Yes, it does involve the finals. Sarutobi's wrinkled face hardened as he continued, obviously the Jonin from minor villages didn't come here with the express purpose of becoming Chunin. They wanted to deliver a blow to the future strength of our two villages and send a message, so we shall respond with our own in the third exam. In the first round each one of you shall fight a team from the minor villages, and I think now would be a good time to share the knowledge you all gained from conflicts in the forest. The Hokage inhaled the fragrant tobacco in his pipe and Hinata used the lapse to interject, Anyosa, Hokage-sama. The kindly man smiled at the shy Hyuga. Yes, Hinata-chan. The girl's index fingers twirled nervously around each other as she tried to calm her rapidly beating heart, though it was hard considering the man in front of her was a living legend. Well, when I was fighting Dosu, the boy who used the sound gauntlet, and, well, his sound attack was broken up by the concussive waves of an exploding tag. The girl finished speaking and sat down before the Hokage tapped out his pipe. That's an excellent starting point. Unfortunately, I can't let my paperwork pile multiply, so I have to get back to the office, but you shall know whom your opponents in 2 weeks. Until then, train hard and think on how to defeat any possible matchup. Now, I'll let you all begin discussing and planning. Sarutobi gave the Jonin one last smile before disappearing in a cloud of smoke as the gathered shinobi began sharing information. End flashback. Lee landed after his initial attack and burst forward after hearing the dull thud of kunai, followed by a distinctive sizzling noise. He easily outpaced the blast while charging towards Jirobo, who erected a hastily formed earth wall. The taijutsu specialist registered the barrier and didn't slow in the slightest, instead he jumped forward while pulling his leg back for another kick. The force of his strike was amplified by the weights and easily shattered the construct. Large chunks of debris forced the heavy shinobi to close his eyes as the spandex-clad teen gracefully landed and used his momentum to deliver a brutal jab to the Otonin's nose. Jirobo's bald head snapped backwards with a sickening crack as he blindly swung his left fist in a wide arc. Lee used his hands to gracefully vault over the bulky limb before pushing off and flipping over his opponent. He harnessed the extra momentum from his maneuver and landed powerful heel kick to the back of the heavy Otonin's head that sent him face first into the ground. The chubby teen ignored the pain while trying to push himself up, but Lee didn't waste any motion and leaned back after the strike until he was parallel to the ground and elbow dropped the rising shinobi's neck. The taijutsu specialist did a backward somersault and regained his feet before raising his legs straight up into the air. Sunlight glinted off the tip of his weights that poked out from his leg warmers as he brought down his foot to crush Jirobo's skull. Sakon cursed loudly behind the lightning prison even though he wasn't worried in the slightest. Barriers were their specialty after all. He knew the flaw in this one immediately and Kitamaru did too, but it never hurt to make your opponents think their plan was effective. It worked too since the Konoha ninja seemed to relax for a split second afterwards, and that's when the spider-like ninja burst into action. He threw smoke bombs at his feet before launching random strands of webbing that forced the two to retreat. However, it was only meant to be a distraction. Golden arrows shot out of the smoke and pierced the ground around one of the kunai sustaining the barrier. Neji sped forward and tried to use his chakra to cut through the string attached to the arrows as Kitamaru pulled backwards, but the ground gave first and a chunk of earth containing the sealed kunai was torn out, freeing Sakon. The spider user notched 2 arrows on the string with 2 more at the ready and shot them towards the Konoha nin. It forced the 2 auto shinobi much needed distance and they sped towards their third teammate. As Lee brought his leg down to end the fight, it shifted course and his metal weights deflected several kunai that were heading for his jugular. He turned to see a dense ball of webbing flying towards him as well and jumped back, but the spandex-clad boy wasn't the target. It hit the unconscious sound shinobi before expanding and encasing him in a protective cocoon. Lee made an attempt to crack through it with a hammer-like punch and deliver the killing blow, but it felt like he hit a wall of solid lead. The spandex-clad Jonin tried to recover and jump away, but Sakon used his chakra to burst forward and tackle him. The Otonin used Ukon's limbs to gain the mounted position on the ground, but before he could take advantage, a haki kushu impacted his side and sent the effeminate teenager rolling. Lee popped up quickly and returned to his teammates as they faced down their 2 remaining opponents. Neji coldly eyed them while saying, "You have been outclassed this whole match, and now you are outnumbered as well. I thought you were supposed to be real shinobi." The two just laughed as an arm and foot burst out of the right side of Sakon's torso. Everyone in the stadium looked on with sick fascination as a nearly identical copy emerged from the Auto Shinobi's body, and all three said, "Who's outnumbered?" The trio stood in a triangle with the twins up front and Kidomaru behind them as Neji and Lee tried to flank around the left. Several golden knives forced them to loop around even farther as Sakon and Ukon adjusted the triangle so the spider user was farthest away from the two attacking boys, but it left him open to Tenten. Kidomaru was forced to leap away as metallic balls landed all around his position and exploded, sending shrapnel everywhere. The formation was broken and the three scattered before landing in a diagonal line with Sakon in the back left facing left, Kidomaru in the middle looking straight ahead, while Ukon was in the front right and watched their right. Lee sped forward but was forced to dodge a rapid-fire barrage of miniature web balls from the spider-like team while his teammates tried to attack from the flanks. He kept jumping around the projectiles as Neji engaged Sakon in close combat with the Juken and Tenten held his brother at bay with a staff. The spandex-clad ninja blurred forward and twisted around the web balls, but when he got closer to Kidomaru he revealed it was a feint and dashed right before hitting the unsuspecting Ukon with a chop to the neck that left him prone on the ground. The remaining two sound ninja cursed and Sakon wished he split up earlier so they could have used their original formations instead of these modified ones. The effeminate shinobi pushed that thought aside as Kidomaru came over to engage the Hyuga. He broke off and rushed towards his down twin as the kunoichi's staff morphed and one end twisted around itself until becoming a sharp point. She threw the javelin at Ukon, but his brother jumped in front of the throw and the tip went through his right shoulder. The auto shinobi cursed and grit his teeth through the pain after he fell backwards. The force generated from impacting the ground pushed the javelin back out of the wound, but Sakon barely winced as he grabbed his brother and reabsorbed him. The green-haired ninja hissed while rolling onto his injured shoulder to avoid more kunai from the kunoichi, and flipped to his feet just in time to use his left arm to block Lee's kick towards his wound. It left him open though as Tenten managed to grab the down javelin and shove it into his left side. The green-haired teen coughed up blood as the girl twisted her weapon in the wound before pulling it out and lining up the fatal blow, but a ball of webbing saved Sakon when it smashed into him and formed a cocoon. Seeing his teammates were down, Kidomaru kept his distance from Neji and raised his upper right hand. "I surrender." Karen rushed out of the contestants' box as Genma declared Team Guy the winners and announced a short intermission. 15 minutes after the last fight ended, Genma announced the next match while Team 10 and the Jinan from Kuza walked onto the arena floor. The audience cheered when the fighters stepped onto the battlefield, but it was quieter than before, almost like the violence of the first match had sobered the crowd. Asuma's Jinan paid their lack of applause no mind and faced down the enemy team made up of one girl and two boys. The girl was slightly taller than Ino and somewhat pale with dark purple hair and forest green eyes that stared at the Konoha shinobi excitedly. Her Hittite was attached to a light green belt wrapped tightly around her small waist and held up her brown shinobi pants that were tucked into white tape, which wrapped up her legs and covered her feet, and brown shinobi sandals. She had a yellowish-green shirt with sleeves that just covered her petite shoulders and brown forearm guards. The Jinan in the middle had buzzed brown hair and black eyes that anxiously roved around the stadium as his yellow shinobi sandals shifted in the light grass. He was a head shorter than Kuuji and wearing dark green shorts with a thin windbreaker that covered his wiry frame and matched the light green color of the Hittite, which he wore as a headband. The tan boy on his right had a shaved head and wore no shirt, just a thin, dark green vest that was covered in small Kuza symbols that were an earthy brown. His muscular torso had several light scars on his abdomen and chest, and one particularly long one that started an inch to the left of his belly button and extended into the brown cloth of his Hittite that served as a belt to hold his dark green pants up. Earthy brown shinobi sandals spread out as the Jinan took a defensive stance when the proctor raised his arm. The next match is between Team 10 of Konohagakure and Team 4 of Kusagakure. The crowd grew louder as anticipation gripped them and Genma's hand sliced through the air. "Begin." Shikamaru sighed after the proctor jumped backwards and wondered what deities he offended. First he had to fight the one girl in the forest, and now they had to fight one of the teams there was no prior information on. The lazy boy continued grumbling under his breath as Kuuji's arms inflated in response to the hand seals the shirtless Jinan was making. Their opponent placed his palms on the ground after finishing, and Shikamaru knew he was an earth user before the two boulders nearly 15 feet wide flew at Team 10. The Akimichi's fists easily shattered the chunks of earth as he and Dino ran towards the Kuza team while Shikamaru followed slowly behind, carefully observing the enemy's movements. The Nara barked out, "Hold it," when he saw the kunoichi pull out red pellets from her pouch, then, "Retreat." when she threw them towards his comrades. Ino and Kuuji jumped backwards as blades of grass burst through the maroon smoke and tried to pierce them, however the Yamanaka quickly unfurled her whip and snapped it. A fiery sonic boom was launched from the tips and morphed into a small blade that easily sliced through the grass near the poison cloud. The strands grew back incredibly fast, but it gave the two shinobi enough room to regroup with Shikamaru, who tossed several exploding kunai through the dispersing gas. The grass strands moved to intercept the projectiles as the Nara called out, "San." Ino and Kuuji flanked wide and ran into the long grass as Shikamaru's shadow split and a dozen tendrils shot towards the Kuzujinan. The grass blades quickly retreated into the skinny teen's windbreaker and his team fell back, carefully watching the snake-like shadows. As they got near the edge of the short grass, Ino burst out behind them wielding her Tisen, which were glowing an angry red. The strange grass shot out of the Kuzujinan's jacket and tried to ensnare the kunoichi, but her weapon easily sliced through the dangerously sharp grass blades before she put on a burst of speed to outdistance the poison gas that burst behind her. The Yamanaka raised the fan in her left hand and prepared to strike the poison user when she saw the Tanjinan separate from his teammates while forming two seals. The blonde overloaded her feet with chakra as the earth user slapped his hands onto the ground and burst forward to avoid the jutsu and attack the retreating kunoichi. The girl just smiled as an earth wall sprang out of the ground in front of the blonde and her fiery Tisen sunk in. Ino tried to rip it out quickly, but before she could, the earth construct sunk back into the ground and her weapon snapped in two as a result. The Yamanaka turned to face the Baljinan while shouting, "Bastard," and unrolling her whip. The blonde left her back open and the Kuzujinan moved to take advantage, but it became apparent the kunoichi was luring them in when she jumped aside and a ball of meat rolled out of the tall grass and towards the two. The Doden user created another hastily formed earth wall, but the Akimichi smashed right through it and sent the duo flying. Ino grinned as she faced down the one responsible for damaging her Tisen. A flick of her wrist sent the whip snapping forward, but the shinobi ducked below the attack as a small fireball appeared above him. The girl pulled the whip back while her remaining Tisen slashed forward and the Baljinan tried to roll underneath the strike, but Ino's fan left a wound on his left side that began to smoke and flared an angry red. The kunoichi was about to press her advantage when she heard Shikamaru shout a warning and jumped backwards into the tall grass as several poison pellets landed in front of her previous position. The two other Kuzujinan landed next to their wounded teammate and the kunoichi asked, "Can you still fight?" He grunted before answering, "Yeah, but probably not effectively at close range. I'll just play defense." The two nodded as they looked at their opponents who also regrouped. They were huddled together as Kuuji asked, "Did you see enough Shikamaru?" Ino continued before he could respond, "Yeah, did you have enough relaxation time while me and Kuuji were doing the real work? I notice how most of the plans involve you doing as little as possible." The lazy Jinan ignored the blonde's question and looked at his oldest friend, "Yeah, and now I'm convinced the shinobi gods hate me." Ino prepared to continue emasculating him but the Nara cut her off. Not only was there a lack of information on these opponents, but after observing their fighting styles I can safely say this is going to be a pain in the ass. The bald one uses earth jutsu, and now that he's hurt I guarantee they'll have him hang back and play defense, so it will be hard to corral them into shadowy areas where my jutsu are most effective. Meanwhile the one in the windbreaker has dangerously sharp grass that's incredibly flexible and versatile, oh yeah, and the kunoichi uses poison, meaning it's hard to use coordinated attacks and plan. Scatter. The three were forced to split up as more poison pellets burst in their area. They found it difficult to regroup as the skinny shinobi's grass chased Ino and Kuuji around the circle of short grass while the kunoichi focused on Shikamaru in a concerted effort to get them into the tall blades that ringed around the center field. To make things worse, their third teammate received some supplies from the girl and was limiting their dodging options with poison gas and kunai. The Konohanin were willing to ambush the Kuzujinan from the thick grass, but not fight them straight up in it, and Shikamaru could see this team would be forced to do just that if they didn't push back quickly. The boy looked at the grass strand snaking towards him now. He could easily ensnare the boy with his cage main using the grass shadow, but he didn't have enough time to use it, and even there was it would be impossible to utilize effectively while dodging poisoned. Frustration got the better of the genius as he futilely tried to slice a blade of grass that was stabbing towards his neck with a kunai, but the sharp strand simply bent with the strike before the blades wrapped around his wrist and began to dig into the skin. The Nara hastily brought his left hand to the trapped one in the ram seal as a chunk of rock took his place. The higher-ranked men in the crowd raised their eyes at that. Performing a kawamiri while held by something or in pain took high levels of concentration and mental fortitude. Shikamaru appeared about 20 feet behind his blonde teammate while saying, "Buy Kuuji some room, Ino." The blonde did just that and launched her descent at the blades of grass. They easily sliced through them and Shikamaru called out, "Bowl them over Kuji." The Akimichi formed a hand seal, used the Baiken no Jutsu as the blades of grass tried to slash him, but they found the fat layer too pliable to cut into. Kuji rolled towards the Jinan with the intent of separating them, but instead the bald one formed a sloped earth wall that launched the Akimichi into the air. The crowd let out a scream of panic when it looked like he was going to crash into them, but he smashed into an invisible barrier that sent him careening towards the ground. The portly teen made a large splash after landing in the mud pit, and Shikamaru cursed as he and Ino began dodging again. The Nara knew the Doden user wouldn't be able to block the Baiken no Jutsu after Kuji burst through the last earth wall, but they did too and redirected it instead. However, Shikamaru's sharp mind instantly thought of a way to take advantage of it, and he shouted out, "Kuji, are you alright?" They heard a large gasp for breath before he answered, "Yeah, just a little dirty." The lazy Jinan nodded before calling out, "Okay, I think I want to take a nap in the trees." The strange proclamation threw their opponents off guard as the Akimichi responded, "Roger." Seconds later he burst through the grass in his Baiken no Jutsu from and swerved around the Kuza Jinan before clearing a trail through the grass for his teammates. Shikamaru took advantage of the respite to explain his plan while the Kuza Jinan stood their ground. Seconds later they chuckled derisively as the Kuji rolled at them once more and responded with the same defense. A sloped earth wall launched the ball of chub towards the sky, but the hefty shinobi uncurled and pushed off the invisible barrier before landing on the cliff, and trepidation set in for the Kuza team after the Konohanan seized the high ground. Seconds later they scrambled away as the Akimichi used the Bubun Baiken no Jutsu to inflate his arms and started ripping up chunks of earth to throw at them. Shikamaru moved into the grassy ring and watched as Kuji herded the Kuza team into the sandy area where the bald Jinan couldn't use Doden Jutsu. He nodded to Ino, who launched 5 shuriken into the air before going through several hand seals, and when she finished intoned, "Kage shuriken no Jutsu." The throwing stars multiplied until there were 40 and pushed the Kuza Jinan farther into the sandy area next to the cliff while Kuji opened a sealing scroll. It seemed like hundreds of balloons were released into the air as the crowd looked on in confusion. However, most of the shinobi quickly realized how much extra shadow was in the stadium now. The Nara made a hand seal and his shadow extended into the patches before creating a swirling maze around their opponents as Kuji began launching boulders once more. The Kuzanin jumped around while trying to avoid the shadows, but they were only Jinan, and the grass user's long shadow was snagged by the cage main as Ino whipped through a series of hand seals ending with the tiger, Katen, Gukakyu no Jutsu. She formed a circle with her right thumb and index finger before raising it to her mouth and exhaling a large fireball that engulfed the trapped shinobi and continued to burn after his scream died out. His teammates didn't have a chance to mourn his death though. They were using all their focus to frantically dodge the shadows and boulders so they didn't meet him in the afterlife. Eventually the kunoichi panicked and stopped to pull out several poison kunai, but she was unable to avoid the shadows and momentarily lost control of her body as the poison tip of her own weapon slid deep into her neck. The last Jinan stopped and gripped his wound while trying to surrender, but as he called out Proctor, a boulder landed on top of him, ending the boy's life. The shinobi in the stands stood up to clap respectfully along with many Konoha citizens as Genma announced them the winners, yet most of the civilians that traveled from afar and brought their children were shocked into silence by the brutality and killing efficiency of teenagers. Hiyashi watched his daughter walk out with her team and masked his nervousness behind a stoic demeanor. The council was furious when the clan's heiress went off to Sunagakure for training as part of the exchange program. Many of the elders called it foolish to send an unsealed Byakugan to a different village, so Hiyashi put his credibility on the line when he forced the request through. Now it seemed everything was riding on this exam. If Hinata didn't perform well, it was possible he would have to make Hanabi the heiress to convince the elders his bloodline produced strong progeny, and that was something he preferred to avoid. Even though Hanabi was already showing great strength as a fighter, she easily swayed by the attitude that placed Hyuga tradition on a pedestal. His youngest daughter viewed their customs and history as the source of their strength like most of their kin. However, Hinata never adopted that belief and would be able to change the clan. It was hard to live in the present when the past was revered to the point it became more important, and the problems facing them today were pushed aside. Unlike most shinobi clans, the number of Hyuga on the active roster declined over the past decade. Fewer were advancing beyond the rank of Chunin, and the percentage of Hyuga in Anbu was at an all-time low despite the value of the Byakugan on such missions. Their district revenue allowed them to live comfortably, but the clan was nearing the lower threshold of quotas needed to have a council seat and the privileges it bestowed. If the trends continued, it was possible they would lose their rights to the district and the tax money. The Hyuga clan needed an infusion of energy and new life, and his eldest daughter was the one who could do that. She already altered the rigid Juken to fit her flexible body more, and help lay the foundation of a style that could allow more Hyuga to learn the Juken and increase the pool of potential shinobi. Hiyashi was even prouder after learning his daughter created a move he considered strong enough to make an official clan jutsu, something that hadn't been done since the Haki Kushu was added right before the founding of Konohagakure. Hinata just needed to prove her strength here to give those innovations credibility before he could introduce the changes. It would also allow the man to bring his daughter into clan politics earlier. All this swirled behind his stony face as he watched the two teams take the field. Hinata's squad looked over their opponents, a trio of Jinan that had the same format of 2 boys and 1 girl. The tallest boy was just over 6 feet and had a wiry frame filled out with compact muscle. Slicked back green hair came down to the base of his neck. He wore a long-sleeved gray shirt on with black rippling circular patterns that started around the center of his torso and light blue shinobi pants that were tucked into black tape that matched his black sandals. He didn't possess a Hittite, but the Ame symbol was proudly displayed in the center of his chest, inside the first concentric circle. The other boy appeared overweight and only came up to his teammate's chest. He had short aqua blue hair with concentric circles shaved into it and wore a navy and aqua blue short-sleeved camouflage shirt with white shorts covered in small, light blue Ame symbols. Their Kunoichi teammate was the strangest looking by far. The left side of her head was completely shaved while the tightly braided hair on the right side covered part of her attractive face and was randomly dyed varying shades of red, pink, blue, purple, and yellow. She wore a black tank top with 2 sets of white concentric circles that over her ample C-cup breasts, incredibly small royal blue shorts that barely covered her shapely butt and white boots stopped halfway up her shins. The energy in the stadium proved infectious and the crowd started cheering as the two teams took their fighting stances before the proctor's hand sliced through the air. Karasu appeared in a puff of smoke and launched a needle barrage at their opponents, but they split into dozens of copies and the senbone passed through all of them. The puppeteer cursed loudly as Kiba let out a confident laugh. "Don't worry about it." Hinata activated her Byakugan as the Inuzuka got on all fours while saying, "Shikyaku no Jutsu," and burst into motion. Kiba dashed to the right and dipped his shoulder before the shorter shinobi became visible and was sent flying as the fake images faded, but he managed to roll into the tall grass. They pivoted to face the other two as Akamaru got in the fight and performed a Gatsuga to interrupt the tall Amazianon's series of hand seals, but as the wiry teen jumped away he split into dozens of copies. Kankuro pulled his puppets in front of him as Hinata pointed to an area of thick grass on the south side of the arena. Several balls about the size of a fist were launched from Sanshao's mouth that burst into flames when hitting the ground. The Ame team ran through the tall grass while teammate moved to intercept them, but the foreign Jinan flipped up onto the cliff wall before jumping towards the streams in the north side of the stadium. The tall Jinan went through more hand seals before calling out, "Suten, Teppodama." Gunshot. The boy released several pressurized water balls from his mouth that forced the charging shinobi to separate as he barked out orders to his teammates. "I'll take the Hyuga, I go after the Inuzuka, Satoru fight the puppet user." They echoed, "Got it Noboru," and burst into motion. I ran towards Kiba but quickly stopped to avoid his horizontal claw slash. She dashed forward and got behind the boy before pivoting to throw a kunai at his back. The dog user turned and started running towards the projectile as Akamaru jumped and snatched it out of the air. The kunoichi took a defensive stance and hopped backwards and managed to deflect his left jab out wide but couldn't do anything about a vicious right cross to her chin. However, instead of tumbling away the girl turned into a mass of tentacles that tightly wrapped around the Inuzuka. Kiba struggled futilely against the bindings until Akamaru bit his leg and broke him out of the genjutsu. The boy realized what happened and was able to roll away as several kunai hit the imprint in the dirt where he was just laying. I laughed tauntingly. "You may be able immune to misdirection genjutsu, but like most meatheads you still can't break out of a real one." Suddenly Kiba felt the earth twisting around him until he could only move his neck. The kunoichi charged him with another kunai drawn but the Inuzuka bit the inside of his cheek and broke the genjutsu before headbutting the attacking girl. He was about to take advantage of his counter when roots burst up from the ground and wrapped around his ankle. The boy pierced his palm with a claw and continued to rush forward. Kurenai's hand came up to cover her face in embarrassment as the jounin sighed. She was an expert in genjutsu and her student had to resort to the most rudimentary way to break free of one. If their promotions weren't already guaranteed after the forest, the jounin wouldn't have recommended the boy and made him do remedial training, but she still knew the Inuzuka could get it done. Of course that was getting harder to believe when he exploded in anger. "You stupid fucking cunt. Get back here so I can use my claws to make you more attractive." I put up another genjutsu while angrily responding, "Get some manners, mutt, that's no way to talk to a lady." The boy stomped on his toe while his hands fought off an illusion that was attempting to strangle him. "I'll let you know when I see a lady." "You bastard," she furiously retorted. Kiba smirked arrogantly at her. "What, with stupid hair like that and those trashy clothes you look like an ugly whore." The girl let out a shriek of rage, but before she could finish her next attack, Hakamaru jumped on her back. She smashed into the ground. As the dog's jaws closed around Ai's throat, she cursed herself for letting anger distract her. Like Kiba, Kankuro was having quite a bit of trouble against the genjutsu his opponent used as well. Now that there was nobody directing him to the real target, he had to play the guessing game, but the puppeteer only needed one hit to win. Still, countering was hard while trying to block relentless attacks that were mostly imaginary. The puppeteer brought Kurori in front of him to block a wave of senbon, but only two fell to the ground. Kankuro kept Black Ant back to protect himself as Karasa flew above the enemies, launching senbon at anything that moved, and Salamander kept any person, real or illusionary, from getting too close by expelling flames from its mouth. Still, the Suna Shinobi couldn't be aware of every possible attack, and several senbon needles were sticking out of his back and sides. Kankuro noticed his reactions were slowly getting worse as some senbon got around Kurori when he brought it forward and recognized the symptoms of a slow-acting paralytic poison. The puppeteer stealthily injected himself with a basic cure-all, but frustration was getting the better of him. The boy began maneuvering towards hiding spots while avoiding the genjutsu copies, and when the images of his opponents seemed to group around a sand dune, Kankuro jumped into Salamander as dozens of hidden compartments opened up on his puppets and paper planes made from exploding tags flew around the area. A massive explosion engulfed the dunes and left the sand scorched as most of the shinobi just shook their head at the overkill, but it was hard to argue with results. There was nothing left of Satoru but a blackened corpse. Hinata faced down her opponent while remembering the talk she had with her father this morning. Flashback: Hiyashi looked proudly at his daughter from the corner of his eye as they drank some tea and watched the sun rise. The man's white eyes returned to the fiery sphere slowly climbing above the horizon while saying, "You know what is at stake today, daughter?" "Hayata-sama." The clan head nodded while taking another sip. "Excellent. I know your promotion is guaranteed. However, the elders don't care if you become a chunin. They foolishly care more about a dramatic fight than one cleverly fought. You are trying to demonstrate the strength of your Juken style, so winning a one-sided battle won't be enough. You must defeat your opponent on their terms to prove yourself." The blue-haired kunoichi turned to face her father with a determined look on her face. "I understand, To-sama, I won't fail you." Hinata was surprised when the usually stoic man leaned over and wrapped his right arm around her shoulders for a second while whispering, "Don't worry about me, daughter, don't let yourself down." He pulled back quickly and the two said nothing more as they watched the sun finish climbing over the mountaintops. Flashback: and the kunoichi looked around and prepared to fight. Defeating a Suiten user while surrounded by water should help prove her ability. Hinata let the boy finish a series of hand seals while slowly expelling chakra and waited for the jutsu. As Noboru called out, "Suiten, Suigaton." Water Fang bullet, drills of water burst up from the mud around Hinata's feet. She displaced the viscous liquid when starting her rapid spin and said, "Kaiden." The sphere of chakra easily dispelled the water jutsu and she burst into motion after her spin ended. The Hyuga rushed towards her opponent but allowed him to maintain separation while performing seals, and when the boy was done he lifted a hand to his mouth while intoning, "Suiten, Teppodama." He launched 3 more pressurized water balls at the kunoichi and she ducked under the first one before barrel rolling over the second, and after she completed the maneuver Hinata brought her palm forward while saying Haki Kushu, and a blast of compressed air hit the water ball, dispelling it. The Hyuga finished closing the distance and aimed her palm at his stomach, but the boy rolled to the left and her strike hit a rock causing cracks to spiderweb out. She turned and bent backwards under the sharp edge of a kunai before the kunoichi tried to close several points in her opponent's arm, but Noboru substituted as soon as his attack missed. Hinata heard, "Suiten, Bakasui Sasha." Exploding water colliding wave, the Hyuga heiress jumped onto the small river her opponent created and matched its chakra flow. The Amazon's eyes widened in surprise as she quickly overloaded her feet with chakra and flipped over him so they were practically back to back. The boy spun to the right while trying to deliver a kick with his left foot, but Hinata leaned back until her head was almost touching the ground before her fingertips closed several chakra points as the limb passed by. The Amazonan kept his weight on his right foot as he completed the spin and brought his left fist around and tried to smash it into the Hyuga's stomach. The midnight-haired kunoichi's left arm came off the ground as she contoured her body to avoid the strike, then she wrapped the arm around his and used it to support herself while her right palm came up and smashed into Noboru's heart, killing him instantly. The Hiyashi watched proudly as his daughter used the unorthodox style she created to secure the victory, but apparently others weren't so happy as one of his biggest detractors spoke up. "What was that bastardized form of Juken your daughter used, Hiyashi? Obviously we shouldn't have sent her off to Sunagaku where she would be able to diverge from the proper Hyuga way and learn such a wretched style." The Hyuga head snorted, "You criticize my daughter for losing in the last exam Hideki, and now you do the same when she wins in this one." Hinata was able to make a skilled Suten user look foolish using that wretched style, and he was surrounded by water. It's apparent that her new taijutsu form still uses the basics of Juken, but instead of blocking to hold ground she dodged to put her opponent into rough situations. She also demonstrated a solid handle on more traditional techniques as well. Hinata doesn't have enough strength to utilize basic Juken effectively, so she apparently adjusted it to take advantage of her flexibility. Hiyashi turned to address other Hyuga in the section. "Hideto, isn't your daughter having problems learning the basic kata, and you as well, Naito?" The man began to address all the Hyuga after questioning his clansmen. "For too long have our daughters been left behind. Even though some of the greatest Hyuga warriors were women, they had to train so hard to utilize the Juken that their lives revolved around it. None of those legendary kunoichi had a family because they had to sacrifice everything else to achieve their goal. I've overheard many young Hyuga girls wish to become kunoichi, yet our style is not fit for women, so their dreams are crushed. No more, let us support our daughters." Hiyashi smiled inwardly as he watched some Hyuga, mostly those with female children, think it over. It was still too soon to attack the Hyuga traditions directly, but he could gain allies in other ways. Sai looked over their three opponents coolly as the proctor began announcing the fight and leaned closer to the girls as Tamari whispered, "How do you guys want to do this?" Usually the knee operative would let his teammates come up with plans before doing whatever necessary to help them succeed, but this situation was different. Now he needed to demonstrate Konoha's power to the world. Their skills are more complementary than ours, so we should split them up and engage one-on-one. Tamari, you fight Zaku, Sakura take the girl, and I'll handle Dosu. The sandy blonde responded quickly as the proctor was raising his arm. "Let me fight the mummy, his skill is the most dangerous. I can easily keep him at a distance while you and Sakura to finish up the other two." Sai grabbed a scroll as he patted the pack on his waist. "That won't be necessary, I've already taken some precautions." Flashback after hearing about their possible opponents in the finals, more specifically the gauntlet user, Sai knew the perfect person to ask for help. The problem was contacting him. The boy returned to his apartment and pulled out a blank piece of paper before writing. He basically filled up the page before setting his brush down, and after skimming it shook his head and threw it away before taking out a new piece of paper. The artist repeated the process a dozen times before he finally nodded, folded the note, and placed it in the envelope. Figuring out what to write to a friend is challenging. "Hopefully I got it right." The shinobi then hopped out his window and headed towards an affluent suburb outside the main city. He arrived at an average-sized two-story gray house that had barbarian Japanese snow bushes forming a perimeter around the well-trimmed lawn. Sai walked up the gravel path and past a koi pond before arriving at a small deck with an ornate door. The boy paid the intricate carvings no mind and knocked on the polished wood before waiting several minutes. Eventually the door opened and the ink user bowed after seeing his master step out. "What is it you need, Sai?" The root shinobi stood up and pulled out the letter before asking, "I was wondering if you could get this to Naruto somehow. A potential opponent in the finals uses sound waves and I would like to ask for his help countering them. As of now explosions are the only method and it doesn't seem wise to rely on them." Danzo nodded while pulling out the letter and read it over. After a thorough inspection he folded it back up and placed it in the envelope before sealing it. Since the letter contains no sensitive information it can be arranged. "I expect a report on the Auto Shinobi's skills to be submitted into NIE archives, and one containing the young Uzumaki's solution when you receive it." Sai bowed, "Of course Danzo-sama, thank you." The man dismissed him with a wave and he went home. The artist pushed the letter from his mind and started training, so he was surprised when there was an envelope with Naruto's name on it resting on his counter, especially because it had only been 12 days since he gave it to Danzo. Sai shrugged and dismissed the thought before he quickly pulled the letter out that had a storage seal at the bottom under his friend's signature. The boy read it over with a smile before unlocking the seal. A thick stack of tags that all had the same complicated design appeared in a puff of smoke and Sai put one aside while staring vacantly at the rest with a small smile on his face until he went to bed. Flashback and as Genma started the fight and jumped away, Tamari unfolded her battle fan and launched a Daikamaitachi towards the Ando Nin. Instead of trying to hold their ground, the trio jumped backwards and Team 7 used the opportunity to chase down their designated opponents. Sai unfurled long scroll and slapped the tags he got from Naruto onto the ink bird's backs before bringing them to life. The birds scattered as he animated a cackle of hyenas that rushed towards Dosu. The boy easily destroyed the animals with his gauntlet and charged towards Sai before tapping it again. The pale artist jumped backwards as an ink bird flew between them and the tag went off, creating a sound blast that countered Dosu's. The Autogenon growled as Sai ran forward with his Tando drawn. The mummified shinobi used his gauntlet to block the tipless blade before striking it with his rings, but the pale ninja dissolved into ink after the sound waves hit him. Dosu turned and saw Sai running at him with a bird trailing and created another sound drill, but the ink creation accelerated in front of its master and detonated the tag, allowing Sai to run past unharmed. He swung his Tando forward in a backhand grip, but the strike was blocked by the gauntlet once again. However, this time the knee operative pushed himself forward and hit the sound Genon's stomach with a rising knee. Dosu went tumbling backwards, but was able to flip upright and launch a sound drill towards his charging opponent, yet this one dissolved into ink too. The bandaged ninja looked around the grassy arena for his opponent but was taken by surprise when ink badgers burst from the ground and piled on top of him. The Genon was able to dispel them and sensed the pale artist rushing towards his back, and after craning his neck Dosu saw a bird behind him too. Confident this was the real one, he stealthily prepared a kunai and pivoted to meet the charge. As the bandaged ninja raised the gauntlet, the bird picked up speed, and after it got in front of Sai, a kunai pierced it, ruining the seal. The Autogenon sent a sound wave as his opponent and prepared to finish the fight, but he was surprised when the body in front of him dissolved into ink after the attack hit. The shocked boy let out a gasp of pain. Less than a second later he felt the cold steel of Sai's blade sink into his lungs. The Genon's vision faded to black as he realized the pale shinobi used the bird to make him think it wasn't a clone. Temari launched another wind blast at Zaku as he landed that forced him to jump towards the wide-open desert area before she quickly pursued him with a confident grin. The brown-haired Genon turned and set his feet as the kunoichi emerged and swung the oversized fan again. The brown-haired teen brought his hands together while saying Zankua, and the pressurized burst was able to pierce the wide-area attack and disperse it. Temari's eyes widened as she saw her attack fail and leapt aside as the concentrated airstream caused the dune behind her to burst apart. The Sunakunoichi growled as she holstered her battle fan and pulled out two smaller ones. The Auto Shinobi launched two more decapitating air waves at his opponent and Temari started running. She counted how long the blast lasted, and after it ended the girl restarted at 0 in her head while planting her feet and swinging the two smaller fans. Zaku hopped left to avoid the wind crescents while two more Zanku blasted out of the pipes in his arm. Temari kept track of the length again before countering after he finished. The sandy blonde continued avoiding the narrow air blasts while keeping track of the timing for a few more minutes before she felt confident in her analysis. The attack he was using could last up to 7 seconds before a 4-second recharge, but the time between shots always varied on the length of the last one. His attacks could also disperse her wind crescents so the kunoichi couldn't keep attacking from a distance and hurt him, but it appeared the Genon relied on his ranged techniques, so his other skills were probably lacking. Deciding on a course of action, Temari prepared to make her move. Zaku wanted to use the more powerful Zankukyoku against the girl, but it required a lot of chakra and there was no guarantee it would hit his opponent. The boy grumbled as he looked sideways at the cliff. It was his plan to hurt her over there, but it was nothing the boy did could get his opponent into the corner that would make it impossible for her to escape his only wide area jutsu. The Genon focused back and when it appeared Temari was preparing an attack with her fan, so he charged up a Zankua to disperse it, but the blonde swung her fan at the ground and created a pair of small whirlwinds that swirled around the dunes, scattering sand everywhere. He tried to use the airstreams to clear the air instead, but it wasn't wide enough and only stirred up a little bit of a cloud. The boy prepared to jump onto the cliff face to escape the sandstorm created by the screeching whirlwinds, but as his legs bent, a wind-enhanced blade sliced through his neck. Karen made a break for the streams, but the pink cat landed in front of her and slashed with a kunai. The redhead jumped backwards and dashed to the woods battlefield, which made Sakura smirk before entering the copse of trees. The sound Genon cursed as she realized her opponent was intentionally blocking the way to the water. The sensor could still use her Sudenjutsu, but it was easier and more powerful with a nearby source. Sakura rushed towards the girl but stopped short and slammed her fist into the ground as the redhead quick-stepped backwards. Karen momentarily lost her balance from the tremors and the medic ripped a tree out of the ground before tossing it at her. The sensor used her hands to vault over the trunk and launched two brace of shuriken at the Konohakunoichi. The pink cat dodged the first two and caught the second pair before using them to block Karen's attempt to flank and get to the water. Sakura's fist punched into the earth and ripped out a large chunk before throwing it at the retreating girl, forcing her to retreat farther back into the trees. The medic charged once more and Karen braced for another earthquake, but was surprised when the girl started going through a series of seals and dove away when the chakra reached its peak, Dokagiri. Sakura released a purplish cloud of gas that forced Karen further back before exhaling another burst that created a noxious smokescreen. The sensor braced herself as she felt the Leaf Ninja's chakra fall and ducked behind the upturned tree to avoid the Senbone barrage that came through the smoke. The sound Kunoichi swore under her breath when she felt the medic's chakra flare and rushed to get away from the incoming boulders. It was getting annoying how her opponent was able to flawlessly switch from Juggernaut to Surgeon. Sakura jumped in the canopy and gave pursuit. The redhead retreated into the grass behind the forest, but it didn't do her much good because the pink hat started raining down more earth chunks throughout the field. Tired of simply running, Karen flipped through a series of seals before a ball of water formed in her hands. She jumped in the air to avoid the latest boulder and called out, "Suten, Hanryu," as a large jet of dark blue water shot towards the medic. The redhead grit her teeth when the pink-haired Kunoichi effortlessly avoided it and cut off the attack before substituting with an earth chunk that was peppered by poison senbone. Karen went through another series of seals when felt Dosu's signature disappear and cursed. The redhead looked over to see Zaku was wasting chakra and not giving the other Kunoichi any trouble at all. She was thinking about regrouping with the boy to use as a decoy when Tamari created a sandstorm that engulfed them both. The Kunoichi knew it was about to be over and quickly went through a series of hand seals, Suten, Hanryu. The sensor used the jet of water to force the charging pink hat to retreat, and when it died down quickly called out, "I surrender." The daimyo of Yunokuni was somewhat disappointed after the Oto Kunoichi forfeited. She was performing better than her two teammates, but had no chance after they went down. The man was deep in thought as the proctor called a fight. He came here to pick the village he would hire to help put down the bandits infesting his country, and many of his advisors were suggesting Konoha after all four teams won handily, but he was thinking differently. It was impressive that Otto sent two teams to the finals when more often than not no minor village was represented. The Sound Jinan had unique skills that allowed them to fight with Konoha's ninja significantly better than the Ame Jinan and equal to the Kuza squad, but they only had one team in the finals and nobody wanted to get involved in the country's internal conflict. The daimyo looked at his advisors and snorted inwardly. They had no problem spending his money to get Konoha Shinobi, but they were dealing with common criminals, not missing nin. He didn't need powerful ninja or the bill that came with them to deal with common riffraff. Karen met the other three surviving sound participants and Guren in the park near the stadium. The woman didn't even ask about Zaku or Dosu, just turned and headed for the nearest village gate. As they got further away, the redhead spoke up, "We're not being followed now, but I don't think they'll let us walk away freely after what happened in the second phase of the exam." The crystal user nodded, "True, however, they won't try anything close to the village, and once we're far enough away it will be too late for them." The other shinobi stared at her after the cryptic answer, but nothing more was said. Danzo sat near the barrier squad while reading one of his favorite books. The Warhawk looked up when the lead member's head rose. The first round just ended and 5 significant chakra signatures have left through the western gate. The first since the start of the finals. The leader of Ni nodded and walked outside before he placed the book into his robes and carefully smoothed them out. The scarred man looked up as 4 shinobi flew over his head and started walking into the village, confident the mission would be accomplished. The 4 Ni shinobi all wore standard Anbu cloaks and plain white masks that covered their face. They were about half a mile behind the sound ninja that were headed back to Tanokuni and blurred through the trees without making a sound, intent on completing their assigned task. They were almost 10 miles away from Konoha's walls and nearing the rendezvous point with a second team outside the kill zone when the captain's head snapped to the left. His subordinates turned to follow his gaze when a white reptilian creature that was nearly 7 feet tall and covered with deep crimson splotches burst from the foliage of a nearby tree. The 4 of them scattered, but his snake tail sped forward before its fangs sunk into one agent's leg. The deadly venom did quick work as the reptile sucked the life force and chakra out of its victim while the creature grinned. The 3 remaining shinobi were braced for an assault, but were still taken aback by its speed when the alabaster monster disappeared before reappearing behind the man on the left. The other 2 couldn't even shout a warning before Renji lifted him up by the throat and began crushing his esophagus. The man frantically tried to get free while his teammates rushed the monster, but the snake tail kept them back with acid shots as the albino beast grabbed his captive's wildly swinging legs before effortlessly ripping him in two and casually tossing the pieces aside. As their team member died, the 2 remaining Rudanbu retreated to the ground while performing a series of hand seals, and after landing shouted Doden, Doryudan, Earth Dragon Bullet, and Kaden, Karyudan, Fire Dragon Bullet, simultaneously. A dragon's head made of mud rose from the earth and launched mud balls towards Rinji while the captain exhaled a stream of flames with the face of a dragon that ignited the mud bombs. The fiery projectiles flew at the beast, but he disappeared before they impacted the tree he was standing on and destroyed it in a fiery explosion. The two shinobi barely saw a white streak before the monster reappeared between them. It grabbed the captain by the throat while the snake tail spat several dripping fangs into the other, causing him to shriek in pain and fall to the ground while the poison did its work. The captain tried to escape the vice-like grip of this creature as it smiled and leaned forward. 4-inch fangs pierced his neck and pumped in slow-acting venom, and the squad leader wailed pitifully as the creature took its time while sucking at his very life essence. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.